All right, now let's talk about how we can make things change in temperature. So when we're talking about temperature, right, normally we think of like hot and cold, right? In painting and in color theory, we think about warm and cool, okay? Not necessarily cold, cold, and not necessarily hot, hot, right? We want to make things look warmer, and in that case, we're talking about more towards the like reddish side. And then when we're talking about cooler, we're talking about moving to the bluish side, okay? So in every single color, there is a warmer version and a cooler version, as well as like a neutral version, right? Most of the like highly saturated colors, like pure blue, those are gonna be like your more neutral versions, right? And then to make things warmer, you would add a little bit of red, and to make things cooler, you would add a little bit of blue, all right? So the hard part about temperature is being careful not to like completely change the hue, right? So if I'm talking about like making a cool green, right? I'm gonna add some blue, but I'm not gonna add so much that it's that it's gonna change it all the way to blue, right? I'm gonna add some red, but I'm not gonna change it to the point where it's like gray or brown, right? So that's what we have to be careful of, okay? So the reason we would change the temperature is not necessarily to make things look cold. Sometimes, or make things look cold or warm. Sometimes that happens, right? Like if you want to make like an autumn landscape with like falling leaves and stuff, right? Then yeah, you would use like oranges and yellows and reds and things like that, right? And those would look warm, right? And sometimes you'll want to use like blues and grays and like things like that for like cold, snowy landscapes or something like that. But that's not necessarily why we use painting or use temperatures. Sometimes it'll do that. Sometimes we will use it for that. But we also want to use temperature for contrast, right? So that's our main goal with temperature anyway. So if you have something that's colder or cooler, right, lower in temperature, bluer in temperature, then it's actually gonna make it go backwards in space, right? Things that are warmer tend to come forward, right? And the more contrast between the two, the more they'll stand out from each other, right? Similar to complementary colors, right? They're opposites, warm and cool, right? But instead of just choosing complementary colors, you can have like a warm green next to a cool green, right? And those two will stand apart from each other, okay? They'll contrast with each other and therefore become two different things, okay? And that's, again, the goal, right? The goal is to create contrast to make things stand out from one another. All right, so let's start with our green. Okay, so I'm gonna mix some green. Get a palette knife. I'm gonna mix some green. I already have some blue here. I'm gonna take some yellow, mix it in with the green, or with the blue to make a green. Okay, so I'm gonna start on the cooler side because I already have some blue out, right? And if I want to make things cooler, I add blue, right? So don't add too much at one time because like I said, you don't want to completely change the hue. I still want to have green as my base hue. All right, so I'm gonna take my newly made color and I'm going to paint it in. Notice it's slightly bluer and therefore it's colder or it's cooler. Okay. All right, so there's my cooler green. And now I'm gonna add more blue to make it even cooler. Not like more awesome, but like in temperature. You know what I'm doing, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm gonna take this new green and paint it right next to the old green. And you can see just right next to each other, right? Slightly bluer, slightly cooler. Okay. I want you to notice too, it's getting slightly darker as I add that blue, right? That blue paint is darker than the yellow paint, and that's what's going to make it darker, but notice it's slightly bluer, okay? Now I'm gonna add more blue. Again, still keeping the hue of the green, right? We don't want it to become a blue-green, we want it to be a green-blue, okay? Take my color and paint it in. So this is more of that forest green that you guys are used to, which is a cool green. All right, we started from this olive green, and as we mixed in that blue, it's a cooler green, okay? Now I'm gonna rinse off my brush, and I'm actually going to start my green over because it's very far on the cool spectrum at this point, and I want to start from a warm spectrum or a neutral spectrum. Okay, so let's go ahead and clean this off. Okay. And right here. Okay. So I'm gonna take my blue, take some yellow, and mix it. Oh, it's a bit too much blue. Gonna have to add in some yellow. Okay. And now I'm back at my neutral green. So now I'm gonna add a bit of red, all right? So I'm gonna take just a small amount of red, and the fear here is that I mix too much red and it becomes like a brown, which can happen. Notice it's becoming more of an olive, right? An olive color, but it's a warmer green than what we had earlier. So again, warmer just means more red, and cooler means more blue. All right, so if we look here, right, you can probably see how these different types of greens would be different from each other and therefore stand out from each other. Okay, especially if we go from opposite ends of the spectrum. Generally speaking though, you don't want to go too extreme with your contrast unless you're really trying to make things stand apart from each other, okay? But for the most part, subtle changes are enough, okay? Now I'm gonna add a little more red. That might have been a lot. Yep, that was a bit too much. Hopefully I can recover it. It's starting to become a brown at this point. So yep, it turned into brown. So that happens, right? Like I said, that's what we don't want. So I'm gonna grab some yellow and some of this blue and then bring it back to a green. It's gonna look like a poo-poo-y looking, broccoli looking, not even broccoli. Still kind of poo-poo looking. Okay, I feel like this is the extreme end, so I'm gonna add more yellow and a bit more blue. So now we have that like military camo olive color, right? Or poo-poo if you're 10 like me, on the inside anyway. Okay. All right. There we go. Now let's add just a touch more red. Remember, I added a bunch of red last time and it basically killed my color, turned it completely brown. Now I'm just gonna add a bit more. Maybe a little more. And there we go. Should be good. And we'll go ahead and paint that in here. You can see the slight difference in warmth, right? It's a little more brown, which is a warmer color than green. Okay. There we go. Now we have our range of greens, right? We have our cool greens, as well as our, it's kind of a glare, as well as our warm greens, okay? So that's what we want. That's what you're gonna be doing here. You're gonna be making our cooler, oh wait, I did it backwards. You're supposed to be making cooler on this side and then warmer on this side. So that's my bad. But you know, either way is fine as long as you go cool in one direction and then warm in the other direction. I just did cool in this direction and warm in that direction. It's really up to you. It's fine as long as you get it, okay? So if you need to review the answers to these questions down here, I did mention it earlier, so feel free to go back in the video and review the answers to these questions.